I have made no secret of the fact that my all-time game is Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. But the weird thing about that is I actually have a lot more nostalgia for Yoshi's Story in the sense where I actually explicitly have a lot of memories of playing this game for the first time. And every time I play it, I'm always talking about these stories and kind of like my history with the game and like what it was like growing up with it. And with the release of Yoshi and the Mysterious Book imminent, I found it very interesting how we're kind of repeating history because Mysterious Book is kind of getting a lot of the same criticisms that Yoshi's Story had back in the day when it comes to the difficulty level, when it comes to the tone, when it comes to the target audience. Mysterious Book is getting disrespected the same way that Story did. The first thing that came to my mind is honestly how things change because back in the day, back before the release of Yoshi's Island, it was Yoshi's Island was made fun of. Yoshi's Island was talked down on. It was not a popular game among general audiences. Yoshi's Island did not become like seen as an all-time classic until decades later. It's a textbook example of the Wind Waker phenomenon, in which a game is kind of judged harshly because of its tone or its visual style, with no real regard to its actual quality. Yoshi's Island has gone on to be an all-time classic, but the same cannot be said for Yoshi's Story. In a lot of ways, Yoshi's Story was saddled with the reputation that Yoshi's Island got initially as being something that's for kids, something that's very casual, something that's very easy, something with not a whole lot of weight to it. And to a certain extent, that is true. Like, I would say Yoshi's Story is probably on the lower end of classic N64 first party Nintendo titles, but it's very interesting to kind of look back on this game and experience it again because this has actually been the Yoshi game I go back to the most every single time we get a new Yoshi game. I believe I went back and played through this when Crafted World came out. I definitely did when Woolly World came out. I've gone back through it recently when it launched on NSO. Like this has been a game I've gone back to like quite frequently over the years, more so than I think games that I would play that come out today. And I think a lot of that is due to the time period in which it came out in. This was a game I played when I was very, very young. And as a result of that, I am the target audience. And I can tell you for a fact that in spite of like my personal feelings towards this game, in spite of it like not nearly being as good as Island, in spite of its tone, in spite of its weird structure, this is definitely something that I have a lot of fondness for. And the thing that keeps coming up every time I talk about this, the thing that really becomes apparent is just how much this game freaked me out as a kid. It's very interesting considering this game's reputation and like its background, but I always kind of saw this as a very scary game. And of course, I was very young when I played this, but the simple fact of the matter is this game is kind of misleading in its structure and how it handles itself because you would be like very easily forgiven if you were to say this game was very short, it was very easy, that it didn't really have a lot of reason to come back to it. Like a lot of people I feel like have this mindset where like you beat the game once and then kind of move on. Okay, maybe you get through every stage, maybe not, but at the end of the day, there's not really a whole lot here. And I feel like that's not the way a kid approaches the game. Like when you're a kid playing through this game for the first time, you don't know how the mechanics work. You don't know like what's going on. You might not necessarily know how to read the text boxes, and so a lot of it is left up to your imagination. And so when you're left up to your imagination, what you get is like these endless, very unsettling, like dangerous areas with all these death traps everywhere waiting to take your Yoshi into oblivion. And that's the thing that I think it really comes down to. What makes this game so unsettling is the fact that this game does indeed have a very unique live system in which you have six Yoshis, all of all of whom are different colors, and when they die, they're gone for good. This game features a permadeath feature. Okay. So on top of all of like the unsettling music, the weird creature designs, the variety of level hazards that you find in each stage, like when you die, you are dead for good. And you're not going to die immediately, right? Because the first couple of stages are kind of easy, but eventually you're going to make a mistake, you're going to fall in a pit, or you're going to get eaten by a fish. And all of a sudden, your Yoshi is gone for good, and there is no way to get it back on that playthrough unless you find like one of the elusive white shy guys. Like in general, like if you lose a Yoshi, it is gone for good. And that really leads this game to having this kind of weird edge to it, in which on a superficial level, it has this vibe where it's entirely about the Yoshis like trying to find their happiness, trying to find the super happy tree. It's like on a surface level, it seems very preschoolish and very, very immature. And yet, like when you actually play the game, when you're actually dying, when you're actually dealing with all these weird creatures and their weird designs and like, being genuinely threatened by them, like the game really truly shines. It's very interesting in that regard because it's quite a bit different than I think how Island is designed, in which Island is comparatively easier from a level designs perspective. Island's difficulty comes from like collecting things and like exploring stages 100% and like doing everything. Like it's actually very easy to just get through all of Island and like beat the game. Story in comparison like requires you to like navigate all these weird nonlinear stages with all of which have these completely unique hazards and like things in them, and you'll be finding yourself dying quite a bit more. Like Yoshi's story is very interesting because like I feel like the casual player would imagine that like story is way easier than Island, but like anybody who's like spent any amount of time playing story would tell you that like story is quite a bit harder because story has like all these weird aspects to it that just make the game feel kind of randomized and feel kind of all over the place because no two playthrough are the same is the same. You're always playing different stages, you're always going through different obstacles, you're always exploring these stages to get like these different fruits, right? you know, your lucky fruit is sometimes different. So sometimes you struggle with stages that you breeze past the first time, right? Like again, when it comes to the actual stage design and hazards, story is actually quite a bit more difficult than Island. But the game is like oddly weirdly forgiving too, in which it gives you ample amount of opportunity to heal. It gives you ample amount of opportunity to kind of like take your own pace with it. It's it's very laid back in that respect. But at the end of the day, when you do make a mistake and you do die, like it really feels as if you've suffered a severe consequence. In Island, dying isn't really that big of a deal. You have like your live system, you have like the checkpoints, you have all that. Like in story, like that's not necessarily the case. In story, it's very very easy to just die and then suddenly realize that you only have a handful of Yoshis left. If you struggle with a tough section in Yoshi's story, you there is a very good chance that you might not actually beat the game this playthrough. And that is kind of the most ridiculous thing about story is that, if you lose enough Yoshis, like you can't continue and you lose everything that you've been building up to that point. Like again, it's interesting because the game really strikes this very unique balance between being forgiving and punishing. The game really has this like mentality where it's very superficially colorful, very superficially accessible. Like all you have to do is eat all the fruit, bro. but along the way, you're going to be seeing the weirdest things and going up against the weirdest obstacles, things that like don't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. I remember explicitly, discovering the rocket egg for the first time. First of all, you don't know how it works, you don't know what it does. And then when you do figure it out, you have the issue of just like, oh no, I don't know how to get out of this. Like, am I gonna die? Like again, the game just has this like it throws all of these things at you with like very little explanation. They just kind of come out of nowhere. And it happens so frequently and with such intensity that like it's honestly kind of intimidating. And then when you like actually kind of like look at the character models, when you look at the backgrounds, like again, they're kind of unsettling in their weird way. Like again, like the sheer amount of like, kind of morose, ominous music, like how lonely and isolated these areas are, like how there are pretty much no friendly NPCs in this game at all. Like it just makes the game feel weirdly hostile. Like it just makes it feel like it has this weird, aggressive kind of worldview that that you have to explore. And I find it really interesting how this game has this reputation of being this kids game, but the simple fact of the matter is being a kids game doesn't make it bad or even like makes it like childish. In a way this game is very very distinct and unique because of its unique style and presentation. Like this is a game that I played growing up that gave me an experience that I never really found again in its way. Like this is something that really had a lot of mystery to it, something that felt like it had a lot of secrets, it had a bit of an edge to it, and it did so in this like completely child friendly way with no real like with no hidden real attempt with no real attempt at trying to pander to adults or make something that would like be appealing to adults. Like this is a pure kids game and I don't understand why uh, the industry has this weird vendetta against the idea of things being made for children. And this is the thing about Yoshi and the Mysterious Book that's really interesting me watching it as an adult is that like it feels as if Nintendo hasn't forgotten how important this is for their products. Again, when I look at like movies like what Toy Story is doing and what like DreamWorks is doing with Puss in Boots 2 and the like of that, like they're very very anxious to try and be taken seriously. They try very hard to be something that like can appeal to adults. So instead of like Toy Story 5 being about a kid playing with his toys, right? Instead it's about ooh, iPad kids, ooh, and what a nightmare they are to deal with, like millennial parent problems essentially, instead of actually, being about the toys. Like Yoshi's Story, I think, really understands something that a lot of these other brands don't, is that yes, kids do need video games too. Kids do need high quality games like this that kind of push their imaginations, that present a lot of things to them to engage with and kind of have their own unique experience with. To me, I think Yoshi's Story kind of excels at this, in which there's a lot of weird things about the game that kind of make it stick with you like long after you stop playing. It is true, absolutely, that there are way better games out there. But if you're someone who's into Yoshi, if you're someone who's loved Yoshi's Island, someone who wants to get into like the wider world of Nintendo, you're going to get this game eventually. And I think when you do, you'll find that it's actually kind of different than anything else you'll ever play. And I think, with that in mind, especially considering its presence on Nintendo Switch Online, a free online subscription service, uh, you will appreciate it quite a bit more than you would if you bought it at full price when it came out. Like, obviously, there are other games on that service, but none of them are quite like this. This was kind of an experimental title. It was a 2D title produced in an era where we weren't getting a lot of them. This was something that kind of kicked off, I think, the whole backlash towards Nintendo's kiddie nature. And today it's reviled as a game that's seen as being nowhere near the quality of Yoshi's Island. But I still enjoy coming back and playing this. I still enjoy like the weird music and the visuals and just the intense platforming. Like this game is it has a bit of an edge to it. And that's what I really, really enjoy about it. I don't believe Mysterious Book is going to be a direct sequel to this or going to try and ape this game's like specific vibe. I think it's doing something quite a bit different, but I think it's built off of the same template. I'm seeing all the non-linear design. I'm seeing the focus on collecting things. I'm seeing like, the focus on like interacting with the environment in unique ways. And like all of that is stuff that I think absolutely has roots in story. Because I remember playing this for the first time and being shocked when I discovered how like the sniffing mechanic worked. I remember like being surprised at how much work and effort went into the animations. I remember how surprised I was at just the sheer amount of variety there was in this game. If Mysterious Book is trying to do something similar, that's actually something that I could get behind. And it doesn't need the creepy tone. It doesn't need like the edge. It just needs to be a good game. And that's how I am approaching Mysterious Book as it approaches its release next month.